In the summer of 1983, a Detroit neighborhood lost more than just another business when $3.4 million vanished without a trace. No alarms sounded, no witnesses came forward, and no arrests followed. The money simply disappeared into the humid Michigan air, leaving behind only questions that would haunt investigators for nearly 3 decades. But sometimes the past refuses to stay buried, and in 2012, a routine garbage collection would unearth secrets that had been hidden in plain sight for 29 years. What began as an ordinary Tuesday morning would become the key that unlocked one of Detroit's most puzzling unsolved mysteries. The discovery wasn't dramatic, it wasn't planned, and it certainly wasn't expected. But it was enough to resurrect a case that law enforcement had long considered dead and buried. The truth, as it turned out, had been waiting patiently beneath layers of urban decay and forgotten time. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. On the morning of June 14, 1983, the East Side Community Credit Union on Gratiot Avenue opened its doors for what seemed like another routine business day. The modest brick building had served the working-class neighborhood for over a decade, handling paychecks from the nearby auto plants and providing loans to families trying to build better lives. Branch manager James Parker had worked at the credit union for 6 years, earning a reputation for his meticulous attention to detail and genuine care for the community members who walked through those doors each day. The credit union wasn't flashy or high-profile. It didn't handle corporate accounts or manage investment portfolios. Instead, it served as the financial heartbeat of a neighborhood where every dollar mattered and trust was earned through years of reliable service. That trust would be shattered before the sun set that evening. According to the official timeline, Parker arrived at 7:30 a.m. to prepare for the 9 a.m. opening. He followed his standard routine, disarming the security system, checking the vault, and reviewing the previous day's transaction reports. 2 tellers, Michelle Washington and Robert Coleman, arrived at 8:15 a.m. as scheduled. Everything appeared normal, orderly, and completely unremarkable. The credit union processed routine transactions throughout the morning. Customers deposited paychecks, withdrew cash for weekly expenses, and conducted the everyday business that kept their financial lives moving forward. By lunchtime, the day's activity had been steady but unremarkable. Parker had even commented to Washington that it felt like a quiet Tuesday, the kind of day where everything runs smoothly without incident. At 1:45 p.m., Parker informed his staff that he needed to step out for a brief appointment with the credit union's insurance representative. This wasn't unusual, as Parker often handled administrative meetings during slower afternoon periods. He mentioned that he expected to return before the 3:00 p.m. rush, when factory workers would stop by to cash their weekly checks. Washington and Coleman continued serving customers without concern. The afternoon proceeded normally until 3:30 p.m., when Parker still hadn't returned. Washington tried calling the insurance office, but they had no record of any scheduled meeting. She attempted to reach Parker at his home number, but there was no answer. By 4:00 p.m., with the credit union scheduled to close at 5:00 p.m., Washington made the decision to contact the credit union's district supervisor. Within 20 minutes, Supervisor Marcus Thompson arrived at the branch, expecting to find a simple miscommunication or minor emergency. Instead, he discovered something far more troubling. The vault, which should have contained approximately $3.4 million in cash reserves and customer deposits, was completely empty. Not just low on funds, but entirely cleaned out. Every bill, every coin, every negotiable instrument had vanished. The vault door showed no signs of forced entry, and the sophisticated time lock mechanism indicated it had been opened using the proper codes during regular business hours. Thompson immediately contacted the Detroit Police Department and the credit union's main office. Within an hour, the small building on Gratiot Avenue was swarming with investigators, forensic specialists, and federal agents. The FBI arrived shortly after, as credit union robberies fell under federal jurisdiction due to the institution's federal insurance backing. The initial investigation revealed a series of disturbing facts. Parker possessed the only master access codes to the vault, codes that were changed monthly and known only to him and the district office. The security cameras had been functioning properly throughout the day, but the footage showed nothing unusual. Parker had entered the vault twice during normal business hours, once at opening and once just before his supposed appointment. Both entries appeared routine and lasted the standard amount of time for daily cash management procedures. More puzzling was the complete absence of any signs of struggle, coercion, or panic. Parker had interacted normally with customers throughout the morning. His behavior had been consistent with his usual professional demeanor. There were no suspicious phone calls, no unusual visitors, and no indication that anything was amiss until he simply walked out the door and never returned. The investigation expanded quickly. Parker's apartment on the city's west side was searched thoroughly, revealing a modest lifestyle consistent with his credit union salary. There were no hidden assets, no expensive purchases, and no evidence of financial stress or gambling debts. His personal bank account contained exactly $1,247, and his credit card showed only routine purchases for groceries and utilities. Federal agents interviewed dozens of Parker's co-workers, friends, and neighbors. The picture that emerged was of a quiet, reliable man who lived alone, maintained few close relationships, and appeared to have no involvement with criminal elements. He attended church regularly, volunteered at a local community center, and had never been arrested for anything more serious than a parking violation. Yet James Parker had vanished as completely as the money. His car was found 3 days later in the parking lot of a shopping center 12 miles from the credit union. The vehicle was locked, undamaged, and contained no clues about where Parker had gone or why. The keys were never recovered. The shopping center's security cameras had been malfunctioning for over a week, providing no footage of when or how the car had arrived. Store employees couldn't recall seeing anyone matching Parker's description, though the center served hundreds of customers daily. As days turned into weeks, the investigation hit one dead end after another. Parker's phone records showed no unusual calls. His mail revealed no suspicious correspondence. His few personal relationships yielded no insights into any hidden motivations or secret plans. It was as if a completely ordinary man had spontaneously decided to steal $3.4 million and disappear without leaving behind a single useful clue. The FBI expanded their search nationwide, distributing Parker's photograph to law enforcement agencies across the country. They monitored airports, train stations, and bus terminals. They tracked Social Security numbers, credit applications, and employment records. They followed up on hundreds of tips from citizens who thought they might have spotted the missing man. All of these efforts produced nothing substantial. James Parker had seemingly evaporated from existence, taking with him enough money to devastate a small community credit of hundreds of working families who a union and shatter the trust guard their modest savings. The credit counted on the institution to SAF Insurance covered the stolen deposits, but the damaged union never fully recovered from the loss. Federal to the institution's reputation proved irreparable. Within 18 closed permanently. Its building months, the East Side Community Credit Union had support. For nearly 3 decades, the case remained one eventually converted into a convenience of Detroit's most perplexing unsolved crimes, the same neighborhood Parker had once helped store that serve. The FBI file grew thick with dead-end leads and fruitless investigations. Local police occasionally received tips, but none led anywhere meaningful. James Parker had achieved what seemed impossible in the modern age of surveillance and digital tracking. he had vanished completely. The years that followed brought periodic revivals of interest in the Parker case. In 1987, a man matching his description was spotted at a casino in Las Vegas, but surveillance footage proved inconclusive. In 1994, a tip from Miami suggested Parker was working at a marina under an assumed name, but the lead evaporated when the individual turned out to be someone else entirely. Each false alarm reminded investigators of the case's stubborn refusal to yield answers. Detective Angela Morrison had inherited the Parker file when she joined Detroit PD's Cold Case Unit in 2003. By then, the original investigators had retired or moved on to other departments. The physical evidence had been boxed and stored in a climate-controlled facility, gathering dust alongside hundreds of other unsolved mysteries. Morrison reviewed the case periodically, but like her predecessors, she found herself staring at the same impenetrable wall of missing information. The credit union building had changed hands multiple times since 1983. After the convenience store closed in the late 90s, the property sat vacant for several years before being purchased by a small auto repair shop. The mechanics who worked there had no knowledge of the building's history, and most of the neighborhood's longtime residents had either moved away or passed on. By 2010, even the FBI had officially reclassified the case as inactive. The assumption among law enforcement was that Parker had either died years earlier, living off the stolen money until natural causes or an accident claimed him, or he had successfully established a new identity somewhere far from Detroit. Either way, the trail had gone so cold that further investigation seemed pointless. The auto repair shop, owned by brothers Marcus and Terrell Johnson, had operated successfully in the former credit union building for nearly 8 years. They specialized in transmission work and had built a loyal customer base among the neighborhood's remaining residents. The building served their purposes well, with its solid construction and convenient location near several bus routes. On a sweltering Tuesday morning in July 2012, Marcus Johnson arrived at the shop to find that the city's sanitation department had left 3 large dumpsters in the narrow alley behind the building. The regular garbage pickup had been delayed due to a citywide route reorganization, and the accumulated waste from several businesses was overflowing the normal containers. The dumpsters were scheduled for pickup that afternoon, but Johnson noticed that one of them was positioned directly over a section of asphalt that had been deteriorating for months. The weight of the container had finally caused the weakened pavement to collapse, creating a hole roughly 4 feet wide and 3 feet deep. Initially annoyed by the additional complication, Johnson grabbed a flashlight and peered into the hole to assess whether the damage would affect his building's foundation. The beam illuminated broken concrete, old rebar, and the usual debris one might expect beneath deteriorating city pavement. But something else caught his attention. Wedged between chunks of concrete was what appeared to be a corner of plastic sheeting, yellowed with age and partially torn. Johnson's first instinct was to ignore it, assuming it was just construction debris from decades past. But curiosity got the better of him, and he used a crowbar to pry away some of the loose concrete. The plastic sheeting was wrapped around something substantial. As Johnson worked to free it from the debris, he realized the package was much larger than he had initially thought. It took considerable effort to extract the entire bundle, which measured approximately 2 feet long, 18 inches wide, and nearly a foot thick. The plastic had protected its contents remarkably well, despite nearly 3 decades underground. When Johnson carefully peeled away the outer layers, he found himself staring at neat stacks of currency, still bound with paper strips bearing the East Side Community Credit Union's logo. Johnson immediately called his brother Terrell, who arrived within minutes. Together, they examined the discovery in the privacy of the shop's back office. The money appeared to be genuine, though discolored from years of storage. More intriguingly, many of the bills bore sequential serial numbers, and the paper bands indicated they had been prepared for vault storage rather than circulation. The brothers faced a difficult decision. The money clearly wasn't theirs, and its presence beneath their building suggested a connection to some past criminal activity. After lengthy discussion, they decided to contact the Detroit Police Department, though they insisted on anonymity to avoid potential complications with their business. Detective Morrison received the call that afternoon. The brothers' description of sequential bills with credit union bands immediately reminded her of the Parker case, though she was cautious about getting her hopes up. Too many false leads had taught her to approach such discoveries with healthy skepticism. When Morrison arrived at the auto shop, the Johnson brothers led her to their back office and presented the bundled currency. Even before examining the serial numbers, Morrison recognized the distinctive paper bands used by the East Side Community Credit Union. The discovery sent a jolt of excitement through her, but she maintained her professional composure while documenting the scene. The initial count revealed approximately $847,000 in various denominations. The bills were wrapped in multiple layers of heavy plastic, suggesting someone had taken considerable care to protect them from moisture and decay. More importantly, the serial numbers matched records from the 1983 theft that Morrison had memorized during her years studying the case. A forensic team was called to examine the hole where the money had been found. Ground-penetrating radar revealed additional anomalies in the surrounding area, suggesting that more bundles might be buried nearby. Over the following days, investigators carefully excavated the alley, uncovering a total of 4 separate packages containing nearly $2.1 million. The discovery raised as many questions as it answered. Why had only a portion of the stolen money been buried behind the credit union? Where was the remaining $1.3 million? Most intriguingly, who had buried the money, and why had they never returned to retrieve it? The plastic wrapping provided the first new forensic evidence in the case since 1983. Modern DNA analysis techniques that hadn't existed during the original investigation now offered the possibility of identifying who had handled the packages. Fingerprint analysis using advanced digital enhancement methods might reveal prints that earlier techniques had missed. But perhaps most significantly, the location of the buried money suggested that James Parker had never actually left Detroit at all. The forensic analysis of the plastic sheeting began immediately at the Detroit Police Department's upgraded crime laboratory. Advanced techniques that would have been considered science fiction in 1983 were now standard procedure. DNA extraction from degraded materials had become routine, and digital fingerprint enhancement could reveal ridge patterns invisible to earlier methods. Dr. Sarah Williams, the department's lead forensic analyst, approached the evidence with cautious optimism. The plastic had been carefully selected for preservation, suggesting whoever buried the money understood the importance of protection from environmental factors. Multiple layers of heavy-gauge material had created an almost hermetic seal around the currency bundles. Under controlled laboratory conditions, Williams began the painstaking process of separating the layers. Each section was photographed, cataloged, and tested for biological traces. The outer plastic showed signs of having been handled extensively, with multiple contact points where someone had gripped and manipulated the packages during burial. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Embedded in the adhesive used to seal one of the packages was a partial thumbprint, preserved in the sticky residue for nearly 3 decades. The print was incomplete, but contained enough ridge characteristics for comparison against existing databases. More importantly, it matched prints taken from James Parker's apartment during the original 1983 investigation. This confirmation that Parker had personally prepared the buried packages answered one crucial question while raising dozens of others. If Parker had taken the time to carefully wrap and bury over half of the stolen money, why hadn't he retrieved it? What had prevented him from returning to collect his carefully preserved fortune? Detective Morrison expanded her investigation to focus on the immediate aftermath of the 1983 theft. She re-examined witness statements, police reports, and surveillance data with fresh eyes, looking for any detail that might explain Parker's apparent inability to return for his buried treasure. The original case files revealed that Parker had been spotted at Detroit Metropolitan Airport just 2 days after the theft, but security footage from that era was grainy and inconclusive. The sighting had never been confirmed, and investigators had assumed he had boarded a flight to an unknown destination. But what if Parker had never left the city at all? Morrison began working backward from the burial site. The packages had been interred in a precise rectangular pattern, suggesting careful planning rather than hasty concealment. Someone had taken considerable time to dig the holes, position the bundles, and cover them with enough concrete and debris to avoid detection. This level of preparation indicated Parker had intended the burial as temporary storage, not permanent disposal. The auto repair shop's property records revealed intriguing information about the building's history after the credit union closed. The structure had remained vacant for nearly 2 years before being converted into the convenience store. During that period, the building had been accessible to anyone familiar with its layout and security vulnerabilities. Morrison theorized that Parker might have returned to bury the money during this window of abandonment. The timing would have provided him with unsupervised access to the property while giving him time to plan the concealment carefully. But if that was the case, what had happened to prevent his return? The detective decided to focus on Parker's personal history, searching for medical records, death certificates, or any documentation that might explain his disappearance. The original investigation had been thorough, but 30 years of technological advancement had made previously inaccessible records available through digital databases and cross-referencing systems. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Hospital admissions records from Detroit Receiving Hospital showed that a John Patterson, matching Parker's approximate age and physical description, had been admitted on August 15, 1983, just 2 months after the theft. The patient had been found unconscious in an abandoned warehouse on the city's east side, suffering from severe head trauma and carrying no identification. Patterson had remained in a coma for 3 weeks before dying of complications from his injuries. Because he was unidentified and had no known family or friends, he had been buried in an unmarked grave in a pauper's section of Woodlawn Cemetery. The case had been classified as a probable assault, but no suspects were ever identified, and the investigation was eventually closed. Morrison requested Patterson's medical records and autopsy report. The physical description was remarkably similar to Parker's documented characteristics. Height, weight, and general build all matched within acceptable margins of error. More significantly, the deceased man had several distinctive scars that aligned with injuries Parker had sustained in a childhood accident, details that had been documented during his employment background check at the credit union. Dental records provided the definitive answer. Morrison arranged for the exhumation of Patterson's remains and comparison with Parker's dental records from his credit union employment file. The match was conclusive. John Patterson was James Parker, and he had been dead for over 28 years. The revelation transformed the entire case. Parker hadn't escaped to a tropical paradise or assumed a new identity in a distant city. He had died violently just 2 months after stealing the money, taking the location of the buried fortune to his grave. The carefully wrapped packages had waited underground for 3 decades, their creator long since deceased and unable to reclaim his hidden treasure. But Parker's death raised new questions that were potentially more disturbing than his disappearance. The head trauma that killed him wasn't consistent with an accidental fall or random mugging. The medical examiner's notes described injuries suggesting he had been struck repeatedly with a blunt instrument. indicating deliberate violence rather than opportunistic crime. Morrison began investigating Parker's activities during the 2 months between the theft and his death. If someone had killed him, they might have been seeking information about the missing money. The fact that only a portion of the stolen funds had been recovered suggested that Parker might have hidden the remainder elsewhere, or that someone else had gained access to part of the fortune. Bank records from the period immediately following the theft showed no unusual deposits or withdrawals that could be traced to the stolen money. Parker's known associates had been thoroughly investigated in 1983 and cleared of involvement. Yet someone had known enough about Parker's activities to locate and kill him, suggesting a connection that the original investigation had missed. The warehouse where Parker's body had been found was located approximately 3 miles from the credit union, in an area known for drug activity and violent crime. The building had been demolished in the late 1990s, eliminating any possibility of recovering additional forensic evidence from the death scene. Morrison expanded her investigation to include other unsolved murders from the summer of 1983, looking for patterns or connections that might link Parker's death to broader criminal activity. The Detroit of that era had been struggling with economic collapse, rising crime rates, and the early stages of the crack cocaine epidemic. Violence was commonplace, and many homicides went unsolved due to limited police resources and community distrust. One case caught her attention. Marcus Thompson, the credit union supervisor who had first discovered the empty vault, had been found shot to death in his car outside a restaurant in September 1983, just 3 weeks after Parker's death. The case had been classified as a robbery gone wrong, as Thompson's wallet and jewelry were missing. But the timing was suspicious enough to warrant closer examination. Thompson's murder had been investigated separately from the credit union theft, and no connection had been established at the time. However, Morrison noticed several troubling coincidences. Thompson had been scheduled to meet with federal investigators the day after his death to provide additional information about the credit union's security procedures. His appointment book, recovered from his office, contained several notations about discrepancies in vault access logs that he intended to discuss with the FBI. The restaurant where Thompson was killed was less than 2 miles from the warehouse where Parker's body had been discovered. Both locations were in areas with minimal police patrol and limited witness potential. The similarities suggested that someone with knowledge of the local area had chosen these sites specifically for their isolation and reduced risk of intervention. Morrison began to suspect that Parker and Thompson might have been killed by the same person or persons. If Thompson had discovered information that could have led investigators to Parker or the missing money, his death would have effectively closed off that avenue of investigation. The timing of both murders, occurring within weeks of each other during the most intensive phase of the federal investigation, seemed too convenient to be coincidental. The detective requested Thompson's original case file and began comparing forensic evidence from both crime scenes. The ballistics report from Thompson's murder indicated he had been shot with a .38 caliber revolver, a common weapon that would be difficult to trace. However, the angle and pattern of the shots suggested the killer had been positioned behind and slightly to the right of the victim, indicating familiarity with Thompson's routine and movements. Thompson's appointment calendar revealed another intriguing detail. In the weeks following the theft, he had met several times with someone identified only as D.W. in his scheduling notes. The meetings were listed as confidential consultations, without additional details about their purpose or location. Morrison cross-referenced the initials against employees, investigators, and other individuals connected to the case, but found no obvious matches. However, a careful review of witness statements from the original investigation revealed that several people had mentioned seeing an unfamiliar man in the credit union building during the weeks before the theft. The individual had been described as well-dressed, professional in appearance, and claiming to represent an insurance company or security consulting firm. No one had thought to question this person's presence at the time, as credit unions routinely worked with various service providers and consultants. The man had never been formally interviewed or identified, and his presence had been noted only in passing by witnesses discussing other aspects of the case. The pattern that emerged suggested a level of sophistication and planning that extended far beyond Parker's apparent capabilities. Someone had been studying the credit union's operations, identifying vulnerabilities, and possibly recruiting Parker as an inside accomplice. When the theft was discovered and the investigation intensified, this unknown individual might have eliminated both Parker and Thompson to prevent them from revealing information that could lead back to the true mastermind. The buried money represented only a portion of the stolen funds, raising the possibility that the remainder had been successfully laundered or transported out of the area. If Parker had been working with partners, his death might have been intended to eliminate a potential witness while allowing the other conspirators to keep a larger share of the proceeds. Morrison realized that the case she had inherited was far more complex than a simple employee theft gone wrong. The discovery of the buried money had provided the key to unlocking a conspiracy that had claimed at least 2 lives and potentially involved additional perpetrators who had remained hidden for 3 decades. The investigation fact, it had just begun, was far from over, and Morrison's investigation into the mysterious D.W. consumed the following weeks. She methodically worked through archived phone records, credit union vendor contracts, and security company rosters from 1983. The search proved frustrating until she discovered a series of consulting invoices buried in the credit union's financial records that had been seized as evidence but never thoroughly examined. The invoices were dated between March and May 1983, just weeks before the theft. They were billed by something called Midwest Security Solutions, a company that claimed to provide risk assessment services to financial institutions. The contact person listed on every invoice was D. Washington, with a Detroit phone number that had long since been disconnected. Morrison ran the company name through state business registration databases, both current and archived. Midwest Security Solutions had been incorporated in February 1983 and dissolved in October of the same year, just 1 month after Marcus Thompson's murder. The business had existed for exactly 8 months, operating only long enough to establish credibility before vanishing completely. The incorporation papers listed David Washington as the company's president and sole employee. His listed address was a mail forwarding service that had closed in 1987. No other business records, tax filings, or insurance documents could be located. It was as if the entire company had been designed to exist temporarily and leave no permanent trace. Washington's name triggered a memory from Morrison's review of the case files. She pulled out witness statements and found what she was looking for. Michelle Washington, one of the tellers present on the day of the theft, had mentioned during her initial interview that a cousin named David had recently started a consulting business. She had been proud of his entrepreneurial efforts and had even suggested to James Parker that the credit union might benefit from David's security expertise. The connection was circumstantial but compelling. David Washington had used his family relationship with the teller to gain access to the credit union's operations. He had studied their procedures, identified vulnerabilities, and likely recruited Parker as his inside accomplice. When the theft was discovered and the investigation intensified, Washington had eliminated both Parker and Thompson to protect himself. Morrison located Michelle Washington living in a senior housing complex on Detroit's northwest side. Now, in her 70s, the former teller had vivid memories of the events that had shattered her workplace and destroyed her faith in people she had trusted. She remembered her cousin David as charming, ambitious, and always looking for opportunities to advance himself. The discovery of those buried millions finally gave the Detroit community some answers, but it also revealed that the truth was far darker than anyone had imagined. James Parker wasn't the master criminal who had escaped to live a life of luxury. He was a victim, manipulated, and ultimately murdered by someone who had played a much longer game. David Washington had orchestrated the entire operation from the shadows, using family connections and professional facades to execute one of the most calculated thefts in the city's history. Detective Morrison's investigation eventually led to Washington's arrest in 2013, though by then he was a 78-year-old man living quietly in Phoenix under yet another assumed identity. The remaining $1.3 million was never recovered, likely spent or laundered decades earlier. Washington was convicted of conspiracy and accessory to murder, receiving a 15-year sentence that he would serve until his death in prison in 2018. The East Side Community Credit Union building still stands today, though it has housed many different businesses since that fateful summer of 1983. The Johnson brothers continued operating their auto repair shop there until 2019, when they finally retired and sold the property. They never forgot the moment when a simple garbage bin collapse revealed secrets that had waited nearly 3 decades to surface. For the families who had lost their savings in 1983, the resolution brought mixed emotions. Justice had finally been served, but it had taken 40 years and cost additional lives. The federal insurance had long since made them whole financially, but the betrayal of trust had left scars that money could never heal. The case stands as a reminder that sometimes the most devastating crimes aren't committed by strangers in masks, but by people who smile at you every day, who know your routines, and who understand exactly how to exploit the trust you've placed in them. In a city that had seen its share of violence and corruption, the East Side credit union theft remained unique not for its brutality, but for its cold calculation and the decades of silence that followed. What started as a routine garbage collection had uncovered more than buried money. It had revealed the true cost of greed, betrayal, and the lengths some people will go to cover their tracks. The millions were recovered, the mystery was solved, but the lessons about trust and vulnerability would linger long after the last evidence box was filed away. Sometimes justice arrives not through brilliant detective work or advanced technology, but through pure chance and the persistence of those who refuse to let the past stay buried. In Detroit, where so many stories end without resolution, this one finally found its conclusion beneath a pile of broken concrete and forgotten time.